Oh, good evening. My name is Hayward Evans and my co-convener Eddie Rive of the Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee. This is the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And we're still doing that same march. But let me begin with, which we always do. First, giving all the glory and honor to God for allowing us to be here together. We have a great crew, if y'all can see them. And also to you, the viewership. Thank you for viewing. On that note, please, let me change it, give it to my co-host, Eddie.
Thank you very much. It's very important, and I was really pleased to see that Reverend Al Sharpton and others were able to organize the march in Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, we had our representative, Kevin Allen, who is chair of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, who participated today. And it's very important for us to recognize, celebrate, and remember Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. We participate with the Sale King County Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition that sponsors the march every year on Dr. King's holiday. And we acknowledge at April 4th, the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King every year. And then August 28th is the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And the day is August 28th, and we know that we have COVID-19, but we made every attempt to include as many diverse groups and people as possible to be participating in this event. And you'll see a lot of people that you will know, and some that didn't get their stuff in on time, like my good friend Anila Alzili from the American Muslim Empowerment Network, who does a lot of work, and she's been a member for a long time. So at this time, starting out, we would like to have my good friend and sister Josephine Howe do every stanza of Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. For we have come over a way that the tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out of the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the bright gleams of our bright stars is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land, true to our God, true to our native land. Amen.
Hey, was that
Lift
fantastic or was that fantastic? And how many people do all three verses? Hey, for y'all listening out there, I want you to listen to all three verses of the American national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. What do you think, Eddie?
Well, they need to listen to it.
y'all need to listen to it. It has some really down low kind of things that impact our belief in this government, or originally why it was set up for white supremacy. But we have something coming up for you that we think is absolutely great. In the spirit of the 1963 March on Washington, we have
John Lewis. We have Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech.
But John Lewis, God rest his soul, fabulous, fabulous person fighting for civil rights.
You can see hundreds and thousands of people coming toward Constitution Avenue, and we knew then that we were going to have many more people than we expected. It was a very special day. I felt so uplifted and so moved.
Okay, when we hear from Dr. King now?
Remember, he had a dream.
Famous.
Dr. King had the dream.
That was a famous speech he gave at the march in 1963, and that march was organized by A. Philip Randolph.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream.
You know, and the beauty is, Dr. King, my Dr. King, our Dr. King had a dream. Had a dream, still not fulfilled here in America, but he had the dream. But Eddie, I guess my question is really, where did that dream come from? What's up with the dream?
It's time for us to get that check that was been declared NSF by the American government.
Hey, let's see what Dr. King has to say about that. This is what made the March on Washington possible.
And before that, you know, they had the Poor People's Campaign too, right after that. And a lot of things happened with the civil rights legislation and the voting rights legislation after that March on Washington in 1963.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
You know, it was the March on Washington, and you heard what Dr. King said. They're saying, well, you know, you could do it just like we did. Lift yourself up by the bootstraps. And this is not just for black people. This is for all people of color. This even speaks to women. You didn't get the Voting Rights Act until 1920. Come on. The suffragettes and the right to vote.
White women's right got to vote.
White women, we need to take that into consideration. Black women still wasn't until 1965, the Voting Rights Act. But we want to take into consideration what's going on now. But listen to Dr. King. What did he say? Let's think about it. Let's trace the money. Where has this money gone? They say the rubber meets the road with the money. You hear number 45, you know, number 44 was Barack Obama. Number 45, let's make America great again. Well, come on. When was America that great for us? Please, can we go to the next one?
Okay, 1619, Jamestown.
There we go. Let's look at this. You know, in 1619, 20-odd slaves got off the boat in Jamestown to become enslaved Africans here in the United States. But let's look up here at our chart. By 1840, cotton from slave labor, enslaved Africans, let's be clear, slave, when you're a slave, sound like a job. They were enslaved. That was the condition they were living in. 59% of the United States export was cotton. 1.5 million pounds in 1970, with almost 700,000 people that were enslaved. Now, if anybody looks at the numbers, go and Google for me. I know all y'all got your phones out. Google for me, how much does a piece of cotton weigh when you pick it? 0.2 grams. It takes almost 30 pieces of cotton to make 1 ounce. They picked 1.5 million. And then by 1859, 2.25 billion pounds of cotton. How much cotton is that? And we're talking 4 million people enslaved. Now remember, they got here in 1619. We're talking about 1859. How many people were enslaved during that period? 1860, market value of slaves were greater than all the banks, factories, and even the railroad industry combined here in the United States. And by 1865, America had 4 million slaves worth more than $3 billion, and that's in 1960 dollars. Let's go to the next slide. Now people, you know the descendants of the African enslaved came in chains. Didn't come on the love boat. They came in slaves, and if you look at that picture, packed to the brim, and this is not just one level, 3 to 4 levels on that slave ship of people packed like that. And one of the main reasons Native Americans were driven off the land. When you look at, and we're gonna go to the next video. Can we go to the next one, please? Look at that, white supremacy in action. The Indian Removal Act of 1830. Now, I want all y'all to go out there and do your little research on this. Now, why do you think over 100,000 adults and children were marched thousands of miles west, into the unknown territory? Some people even say Oklahoma because they always talk about the Oklahoma land rush, right? But look at this, 1831, when the Choctaw people, they began the Trail of Tears. Thousands of people died, but why were they moved? They were moved to take their land to grow and export cotton. Next slide, please. Now, what kind of money are we talking about here? Look at this, the role of slaves in the economy, more than just free labor. Now, remember now, you have to build a ship. Well, somebody got paid to build that ship. You have to hire a crew. Somebody had to get paid to hire that crew. You have to hire people to catch the slaves. Somebody had to pay them. Then when you get them on the boat, you got to get them over here. You got to buy all these provisions. And see, that's not even in my chart. Then once they get here, you put them on the stage. Well, somebody had to build a place to sell them. Huh? Somebody had to be up there to be the auctioneer. All these people are getting paid. Let's look at the undulation of the economy. So what do we have? We have loans for the purchase of slaves. They didn't come down there and pull out all that money to buy a slave. When they got down there, they had to get a loan from the local bank or lending institution, right? Just like we do today. And then you sign a note, you have that note stamped, that note goes to the deed, you have all these registered people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people generating income on free labor. Next slide, please. So there we go, what kind of money? So by the 1860, more millionaires per capita lived in the Mississippi Valley, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana than anywhere else in America. I mean, isn't that telling you something? And interestingly, they're some of the poorest states in the Union now because of their loss of their slaves. Next slide, please. Now, our new government's founded upon the great truth that the Negro, now this is it, because you hear people say all the time, well, you know, it was about state rights. This was the vice president of the Confederacy. Listen to what he said. Our new government is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. Now, you know, everybody out there knows it's not. I'm just trying to draw to the money. Next slide, please.
We were going to go to the John Oliver Confederacy clip.
So now we're going to go to John Oliver in the Confederacy clip. Let's see about the Confederacy and all these monuments.
The Southern Poverty Law Center says a majority of the more than 700 Confederate monuments in public spaces across the country were erected decades after General Lee's surrender.
It's true, as this chart of the years that they were dedicated shows. There was a big spike from 1900 to 1920 as white Southerners were reasserting their dominance through things like Jim Crow laws, with another spike in the 50s and 60s as the civil rights movement was gaining steam. So those statues weren't so much commemorating recently fallen dead as sending a pretty hostile message to African Americans. And sending messages is kind of what statues are often for. This one says, "We love freedom."
Now, you know, isn't that interesting? Now, let's go to the next slide on the Homestead Act. Very interesting time in our history here in America. So what do we look at? White supremacy in action. Because remember, everybody thinks affirmative action. I even thought affirmative action started in 1965. If you can own a person and have them work for free, that's truly affirmative action. But we're going to talk about white supremacy in action. The Homestead Act of 1862. 50 million acres of formerly indigenous land owned by the natives in the West were taken by soldiers, and they were pushed across, what, 100 million acres given to the railroad, 50 million acres given to the white citizens to strengthen their position of authority. Now, this is during the Civil War also. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go to the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Do we have it up?
Well,
That was your last slide. You're going to talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act.
I'm talking.
Yeah, and also the Japanese Internment Act.
Yeah, let's look at the Let's look at this Chinese Exclusion Act, 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act. What was that? They said the Chinese laborers were working for less money. You know, they brought them over for the railroad and everything. Yet they came up with an act to limit their work, even here in the city of Seattle. Look at the Seattle riots of 1886. I'm going to have you research it, and it's going to tell you what happened in the city of Seattle. There was a black man, Big Bill, and you know, William Gross. William Gross, when the riots broke out here in Seattle, and the Chinese, right here in our international district where it is today, were running for their lives from a mob. They ran into his hotel. He got on his roof with a Gatling gun. Pow, 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 pow. Dispersed the crowds. But because of his position of influence and authority, and I'm talking here in Seattle, saved their lives. And old man Yesler with the Yesler mill, you know, Skid Row, and all of them came to his aid. It's interesting to really look at the local history and look at the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then also look at the Japanese internment. We're talking people right here in Bailey Gassner School, friends of ours, Al Sukiyama and their people. Their families were taken out of school, locked up in internment camps, right here out of Seattle. Yeah, they were 4 years, entirely during the war. Everything that they had was lost. Yeah, there was a little bit of reparations, right? They gave them $20,000 after 4 years. But nobody tells you about this. Abraham Lincoln, right before the Civil War, gave reparations to the slave owners in Virginia. He set aside over $1 million. So Eddie, when they tell us about reparations,
all the northern slave owners receive reparations.
So they're receiving reparations. No reparations. They didn't like this.
And when the Civil War was over, the blacks were displaced from property that they had gained. And also after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, there were over 1,500 black elected and appointed officials in all the southern states, including the governor of Louisiana, the lieutenant governor of Louisiana, the secretary of state in South Carolina, sheriffs in all the parishes. And then the racism kicked in, and they ran all the black folks out of office and burned down their property, disarmed the black militia who had just finished fighting in the Civil War to free themselves. So, so we have a long history of exclusion and torment and torture being people of color in this country. But we will rise again like we're doing right now.
And I want you to check your history books. Look at 1875. Did y'all know there was a Civil Rights Act passed in 1875? Yeah, there was. And there was economic upturn for communities of color, particularly the African descendants of the United States enslaved. There was an upward tick. 2 years later, President Rutherford B. Hayes cut it right out. Sort of interesting, but we're following the money. Let's go and talk about the
let's talk about the occupant. As a matter of fact, all of you look at Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and I was telling someone, they said, oh, they finally got a Latino mayor of Los Angeles. I said they had a Spanish surname mayor in 1849, and once again, a lot of our stuff was just like everybody else. People come in and take over. And sometimes people have borders, and sometimes the borders cross the people who are occupying the land.
You know, and they took over 50% of the land that was owned by the Mexican government then. And interestingly, Mexico didn't have slavery then.
Mexico protected the slaves. The Mexican government and the Mexican army protected the black slaves, and there are colonies right now, there used to be, in Mexico. And a lot of people are complaining about, well, what happened at the Alamo? Well, maybe if the Alamo would have went with Santa Ana, there might be a different story altogether. So.
And I love that you said that because, you know, let's look back to the 1830s. I want y'all to do your research. Now, Eddie and I have been doing a lot of research. I want you to do your research, people, the viewership. Look at what we call the Texas Rangers. You know, they have that nice little star. You know, that star started with the slave enforcement units. But they had the star too. They used that star, they used their position of authority, and they lynched thousands of Mexicans and people of Latino heritage, thousands during that time. And we're talking up to the 40s.
Now, let's see, I guess we are ready for a musical selection by our friend Chandler Williams, and he's going to be singing Sam Cooke's old tune, I was born. I can't sing, but anyway. But he's going to be doing the Sam Cooke tune that was popular during the Civil Rights Movement about where he was born on the river. So do we have that tune with Chandler? All right, Chandler Williams, let me hear you get down. One of the issues, the economic issues that we have suffered for a long time is called redlining. In Seattle, for an example, in 1973, as chair of the Central Seattle Community Council Housing Federation's committee, we released the first report on redlining in the central area of Seattle. There were a lot of activities that took place. There were all kinds of protests and demonstrations, not only in Seattle, but in Portland, in San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, and New York. It did lead to the Reinvestment Act. We had various members of the clergy painting red lines around various parts of the community. Reverend Chip Murray, Reverend Gil Lloyd, and a bunch of others. And we also painted a red line in front of the Seattle First National Bank. And my cousin, Taurus McCall, had been working there for 2 weeks. And his wife, he'd been married, his wife was pregnant. And he saw his cousin down in front of his place of work painting a red line. He started sweating profusely, but he didn't let on that we were related. That also led to the Mayor Wes Ullman establishing a Blue Ribbon Commission on redlining, and we continued to protest, and President Gerald Ford sent out Carla Hills, who was then the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So we know what happened. That's why we're not in the central area right now. Economic injustice, economic inequality, and just blatant, outright racism.
Let's follow the money, follow the money. Now you've already seen, we've already lost trillions of dollars in today's capital from what they did to the Latino Mexican community. the enslavement of descendants of the African descendants of the United States enslaved, what they did to the Japanese community, what they of course did to the indigenous. How you gonna push people off half the country and then what you give them is a little bit of land? Let's go to the red line.
So, okay, do we have the Ali clip?
We're going to the red line, right?
The redlining clip? Okay. Now you get a chance to see how this whole thing works. It worked real well in the central area of Seattle. The plan was to have high rises and condos from waterfront to waterfront, and that's been underway. Excellent job of black removal. Economic injustice, economic inequality, economic apartheid.
That's what you say, economic apartheid. I say oppressornomics. Oppressornomics, new reform in economics, oppressornomics.
So we have the clip here we're getting ready to check out.
The enduring legacy of redlining, the legal government-sponsored effort to deny mortgages and home ownership opportunities to African Americans and other minorities, continues to undermine their quality of life. This violation of basic civil rights continues to negatively impact educational attainment, health outcomes, wealth accumulation, self-esteem, mortality rates, and civic engagement. Homeownership has proved to be both the doorway and gatekeeper to success and well-being in America. It is at the core of today's racial wealth gap.
When they come to access products, the choices that they're given are limited. So you're given, instead of conventional loan, you're given a special loans that have higher interest rates or higher fees that again set you up for foreclosure or failure as well. Redlining discrimination in the Asian American community is live and kicking. And in California, you'll see that Asians had the second highest probability of going to foreclosure, very comparable to Latinos. So Latinos were 1.4, for Asians it was 1.3. And so whether it is in homeownership, rental, small business, foreclosure, across the board, there is redlining.
Between 1934 and 1962, $120 billion in FHA and VA loans were issued. Over that period of time, 98% of the loans went to white families, and less than 2% went to African Americans and other minorities. Using the average home price index between 1934 to 2018, those FHA VA loans equates to at least $3 trillion in current real estate value. Assuming that as loans were paid off and excess funds were invested in stocks and other investments, conservatively, another $2 trillion were created. This white subsidy is the major contributor to the current racial wealth gap.
So many white Americans experience this sense of self-esteem, a sense of superiority, if you will, this sense of mastery, that they have created their own destiny in their lives, and they have no acknowledgement of this invisible hand that supported them throughout their lives, and not just them, but there's a legacy of that invisible hand across generations that has translated itself from the original affirmative action to trillions of dollars of a head start ahead of other communities like African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, others who don't have the same benefit.
Children of homeowners are more likely to graduate from high school, have less childhood behavioral problems, and achieve higher college graduation rates.
In segregated housing and in neighborhoods that are thereby segregated, that tend to be low-income neighborhoods, there is the greater likelihood that the youngsters will be involved in gangs or will be recruited to be in gangs.
I noticed an absence of hope, an absence of light. These kids were barraged with a message every single day of their lives that they weren't valued, that they didn't matter. And they internalized that. And that caused frustration and anger and eventually despair and a loss of hope.
There's now very good science that shows that the sense of not belonging, the sense of lacking self-esteem, raises cortisol levels in your blood. And cortisol is good for you when you're in an extremely stressful situation, but when you're constantly bathed in cortisol, because you're constantly feeling these stressors of being marginalized and being told that you're less worthy, less valuable, and being in constant state of really fear and anxiety, it changes your physiology completely. It makes you more prone to cardiovascular disease. It makes you more prone to diabetes. It makes changes in your brain, which actually makes it more difficult to engage in what we call executive function.
This kind of chronic stress, which is driven by the policies that we've created, is as lethal as any knife or any gun.
Suppose discrimination did end today. How many generations would it take to get to rough equality in wealth across races? Her answer is 7 generations, more than 200 years.
And so when white Americans hear about affirmative action for blacks or for Latinos, they're outraged. They think, I've done this by myself, why can't these people? There's something wrong with these people.
The same programs that were provided to white Americans that enabled them to accumulate this wealth through home ownership, those same opportunities have to be provided to us.
Imagine where minority families would be today if their grandparents had the same access to wealth through home ownership that white families had. What would the wealth gap be between white and minority families if minorities had the same access to wealth through home ownership?
Let's look at the impact of wealth accumulation. I think that video on redlining speaks to it, and we're just talking an absolutely small, a very small segment. And again, I want you, the viewing audience, to research the same thing happened with GI loans and all forms of loans in this country. So we're talking trillions of dollars that have been lost. But let's talk about the psychological impact and what was going through people's heads. Can you play the Ali video, please?
Things are getting much better, but I always wondered when I went to church on Sundays. I've always been one to, I'm not just a boxer. I do a lot of reading, a lot of studying. I ask questions. I travel these countries. I watch how their people live, and I learn. And I always ask my mother, I said, Mother, how come is everything white? I said, why is Jesus white with blonde hair and blue eyes? Why is the Lord's Supper all white men? Angels are white, Pope and Mary and even the angels. I said, Mother, when we die, do we go to heaven? She said, naturally we go to heaven. I said, well, what happened to all the black angels when they took the pictures? And the angel food cake was the white cake, and the devil food cake was the chocolate cake. And the president lived in the White House. And Mary had a little lamb, his feet as white as snow, and Snow White. And everything was white. Santa Claus was white. And everything bad was black. The little ugly duckling was a black duck, and the black cat was the bad luck. And if I threaten you, I'm going to blackmail you. I said, Mama, why don't they call it white male? They lie too. Well, I was always curious, and then this is when I knew something was wrong.
You know, and that's always gotten me. You heard what Muhammad Ali said. When we grew up, we always were taught, you know, if you're black or the darker you are, you're a little less than everybody else. And I guess the question was, well, what happens when you get to heaven, Eddie? I mean, do we still work in the kitchen? Or do we have some degree of equality there? But, you know, everything boils down to the person or the group that's in power controls your interpretation of the past. Listen to what I'm saying. He who controls the history books. I didn't write the book. They didn't teach me this in school. Did they teach you this in school? Now, come on, let's hear from Peyton Barnes.
Hello, my name is Peyton Barnes. Today I will be reading 2 quotes. The first one is by Carter G. Woodson. Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished, lose the inspiration which comes from the teachings of biography and history. Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson was an American historian, author, journalist, and the founder of the Association for the Studies of African American Life and History. The second quote I will be reading is by Malcolm X. A race of people is like an individual. Until they use their own talent, take pride in their own history, express their own culture, affirms their own selfhood, it can never fulfill itself. Come join us. Truth comes through many people to celebrate. Our history is not hatred. Malcolm X, also known as El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. He was an American Muslim minister and human rights activist. Thank you for this opportunity. Have a blessed day.
Yeah, we're back with State Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos. We talk about individuals who are trying to overcome the deficiencies we've had in the state. In 1998, Initiative I-200 was put into law. The Anti-Affirmative Action Initiative, one of the contributing factors of why black people lost the central area after over 20 years of no affirmative action. As a matter of fact, that after very little action, about 1/10 of 1%. But Representative Santos has been diligent in terms of the legislation that she's crafted and sponsored. Two affirmative action pieces of legislation she sponsored in 2017, 2018. She also supported I-1000 to overturn I-200. And she also was the sole sponsor of House Bill 1918, which created the Central District Public Development, Central District Community Preservation Development Authority at the facility at 22nd and East Jackson, which was formerly known originally as Seattle Opportunities Industrialization Center, SOIC. The program was brought here by the late Reverend Dr. Samuel Berry McKinney, and we will be referring to that building as the McKinney Center for Community and Economic Development. But the sponsor of that legislation is Representative Sharon Santos, who's here right now, and we'd like to have her speak on the work she's been doing.
Well, thank you so much, Eddie. And it's really an honor to be here with you as we are recognizing and honoring the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. I think one of the things that's really important to remember is that the March on Washington was supposed to be a march for jobs and freedom. And I think that initiatives like Initiative 200 are antithetical to that spirit of bringing everyone together. The House Bill 1918 is really taking the vision of what the Reverend Dr. McKinney had hoped and planned for the Seattle Opportunities and Industrialization Center. You might recall that that came directly out of some of the civil rights legislation where we had manpower acts to provide job training and educational opportunities for those who were left out of economic prosperity. And through the years, unfortunately, the facility and the programs that were operating therein were not well supported either by governments, whether you're talking about the state, the county, or the city. And I'm very afraid that with all of the gentrification that is going on in the Central District of Seattle, that there was a good chance that we might lose that facility as well. And so to be able to return it back to the community and to center it on the notion of community preservation and development with a special focus on jobs and entrepreneurship for the central area residents, primarily the African American descendants of slaves, but others who are also underworked or underemployed is the real thrust of House Bill 1918.
And we really do appreciate your leadership. As the former State Representative Jesse Weinberry stated, it is a rarity for a sole-sponsored piece of legislation to go through the House and the Senate without any amendments or without any opposition. And in addition to that, you were also able to get the money that's needed to get the building started, the $1.3 million, which should be available right now since a new board has been formed, and we have a couple of the board members, one of the board members, Sade Moore, will be on this program. She's been a dynamic young leader, the chair of the Seattle King County Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition that sponsors the march every year. So she's been doing outstanding work there, but I can't applaud you enough because of the fact you have always been there for the community. And the thing about it is you have the roots here because when you were 13 years old, where did you have your first job?
My first job was at Central Area Motivation Program, 13 years old. And my assignment was to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that was a very important key development in my youth that I hope I've carried those lessons forward into my adulthood.
Well, in terms of the board, right now, as a matter of fact, I talked to Elmer Dixon today, and the Seattle Black Panther Party want 2 floors to have a museum. So that's, we have community input coming in, and we do have that board of directors now. So I really do appreciate you coming in today in the middle of this COVID-19. We couldn't have a public gathering, but we're doing the best we can to keep Dr. King's dream alive and keep all of our soldiers, men and women, fighting for equality and justice, to keep them informed, let them know that we're not going to let anything turn us around, that we're going to be vigilant, and we're going to be trying to make sure we fulfill Dr. King's dream and fulfill the promises that were made to our people years and years ago. So is there anything you'd like to say, Representative Santos, and before you depart?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that is very important for me to communicate to everyone who's listening is, again, the March on Washington was a march for jobs and for freedom. It's really important that we have elected leadership that is aligned with that vision so that they can make the kinds of investments that are necessary to support the job training programs and provide jobs. So make sure that you get out and vote on November 3rd.
That's right. That's very important. That was one of the reasons why they had that march in Washington on August 28th in Washington, D.C. was for jobs and freedom. And as Representative Santos alluded to, her first job and where that money came from, it was the Great Society programs that came after the March in Washington in '63. The Civil Rights Act was passed in '64. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, and the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. And President Lyndon B. Johnson established all these programs aimed at inner city and black folks to lift us up. And in 1980, Ronald Reagan defunded all those programs. So we had to start all over again. It's like almost with I-200. You fight to get affirmative action, and then all of a sudden, some misgiving people come in, and I have to say some of them had racist intentions, and make sure that certain people didn't participate in the American pie, which is very, very unfortunate. So Representative Santos, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm glad that you mentioned the defunding under the Reagan administration, because that was exactly why SOIC went under, was because the Reagan administration came in and the community could no longer afford to keep up with the mortgage payments. And I know your previous segment was on redlining. And this is how redlining gets started, is by making things unaffordable and taking properties away from right under the noses of people.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I know they must be upset with you because House Bill 1918 stopped gentrification at 22nd and Jackson. So it's went a complete full circle back to the ownership of the community, and we really do appreciate your efforts. So Representative Santos, I know you have family engagements to take care of this evening. Yes. We'd love to have you stay around and present the awards, but I don't want your sister and your brother upset with me.
And I don't want them upset with me either.
I understand that. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. So our next segment is what? Oh, we want to do who?
The Peyton Barnes clip.
Oh yeah, Peyton Barnes, he just went off. Yeah, Peyton Barnes went off, but anyway, we have several people who were going to be here that couldn't make it. They didn't get their stuff in on time. But Paul Benz is the director of the Faith Action Network of Washington. He also is a McKinney Coalition member and was a stalwart in supporting us in the last legislative session under the direction of Sharon Tomiko Santos. So we'll hear from Reverend Paul Benz from Faith Action Network next.
Reverend Paul Benz with Faith Action Network. It's an honor and a privilege to bring a brief greeting and message on this historic 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, D.C. for Jobs and Justice. It's always a delight to work with my good friends for so many years, Eddie Rye Jr. and Hayward Evans and so many others who helped bring this virtual remembrance to so many of you that are watching and listening for all the recordings tonight. August 28th, there was a reason why the organizers of this historic march, A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and so many others chose this date. It's a date we should not forget. Besides the Great March on Washington, D.C., this is a remembrance of the lynching of a black man's life, of a young man's life, Emmett Till. And so as we see still way too many killings and murders, most recently Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, we continue to do the three things that I think are historic lessons from the March on Washington in 1963, which is the 50th anniversary that I was honored to be at and privileged to be at with other black clergy in the Seattle area 7 years ago in Washington, D.C. Three things that I believe that this march lifts up in terms of teaching lessons for us to still do today. One is marching. Secondly, it's organizing. And third, it's continuing to call on the power brokers of our day to stand up and do the right thing and to make the changes along with us that need to be changed in this society so that black lives matter. The marching in our streets has been historic and nothing like ever before that this country has ever seen. We need to continue to support those that are marching on the streets, but to call for the end of violence, the end of burnings and destruction of property, but to continue to meet and to march and to use our voices in a nonviolent means to call for justice. Justice that has never really ever come in this country the way it should, and that we know that we want it to come. The organizing still needs to continue in our churches like never before, in organizations like Faith Action Network, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, in our labor halls, in our classrooms, and in the halls of power. More and more legislators and fans work on policing reform are beginning to say we need to make room for racial equity in our legislating in terms of bills. We need to make reforms in what I would call the law enforcement, legal, and prison system that for centuries in this country, since 1619, has had that racist history and legacy that devalued and destroyed black lives, families, and culture. And this will not change. This will not change until the killing of a black man, a black mother's son, becomes as important to the rest of the country, particularly white privileged America, as the killing of a white mother's son. Until that happens, we who believe in freedom, that are watching and participating in tonight's remembrance of the March on Washington, D.C., cannot rest until that happens. May we continue to march in the streets here in Washington State, in Seattle, and Martin Luther King County, and throughout this country. May we do it nonviolently. May we do it in the midst of our differences and move forward to make the changes so that black lives matter. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank Reverend Paul Benz, director of the Faith Action Network of Washington State, also a member of the McKinney Coalition and the Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee, and he's an all-around brother. And I just want to acknowledge the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture for sponsoring this program. And at this time, we will go
to the Urban League.
The Urban League, that's right. The Edwin T. Pratt Award The president and CEO is Michelle Merriweather, and the Edwin T. Pratt Award is being presented to Black Lives Matter, and they are deserving and worthy.
You know, and again, for those, very worthy. You know, and anybody who doesn't know about them, go on their website, go on their Facebook, check it out. And that whole occupation up there on Pike Street, Black Lives Matter was instrumental, if not at the forefront. They were part of the spearhead. But in that same vein, what we have to look at is this award is named after Edwin T. Pratt. Edwin T. Pratt was the director of the Seattle Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. He, during the 1968, they passed the Housing Act. The
Fair Housing Act of 68.
The Fair Housing Act of 68. So in 71, he moves to Shoreline. Well, he was assassinated on his doorstep. And they've never, ever found who his killer was. Yeah. And so in honor of Edwin T. Pratt, and the fact, come on, Seattle police, you still haven't found the assassin from that event. The award is named in his honor for the great works of the Urban League.
He was assassinated January of 1969 on his front porch in Shoreline, yeah. And I have to give kudos to a lot of young folks who organized and had a school name for Edwin Pratt in a majority white community. So I have to give those young people, and that's what we see with the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of young progressive whites out there. I'd be out there too, but I'm an endangered species due to COVID-19. So old brothers can't be out there hanging with you, but for 50 years I did hang out there to make it better for you, but racism is taking charge once again. So Tyree Scott, the Tyree Scott Award. Tyree Scott was the founder of the United Construction Workers Association, participated in probably 40 or 50 closing down construction job shutdowns, even closed down Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Before they had computers, people were buying tickets from Seattle to Birmingham to London to Dallas, and so the planes couldn't take off. But the King County Administration Building was another project that was shut down by Tyree Scott. And because Reverend Lawrence Willis, who is building the teeny houses over at the SVI, the McKinney Center parking lot, they are responsible for having 30 tiny house villages with almost 300 people. And he has got a training program paid for by the Port of Seattle to train carpenters apprentices, and these folks will eventually go into the building trades, which Tyree Scott worked at getting blacks in. There were 5 building trade unions in the 60s and 70s that would deny access for blacks to become members. And so some of those barriers have been removed, but there's still a lot of work to do. And then the next award, do we have Michael Wu?
Can we do a clip from Michael Wu first?
Yes, okay, let's do it. We have a clip from Michael Wu, who worked hand in hand with Tyree Scott as well. And so Michael Wu, it's time for you to talk.
Tyree Scott was a visionary leader for racial justice and worker rights. His name is typically mentioned among Seattle's past civil rights heroes. Yet he only saw himself just as an ordinary worker, taking actions to address the racial and economic injustices he saw. Tyree grew up in Hearne, Texas, before moving to Seattle in 1966, following his time with the Marine Corps. His father, Seth Scott, was trying to establish his electrical business in the central area, but racism and discrimination by unions and employers resulted in the exclusion of black workers and limited the Scotts' ability to compete for and win large public contracts. In 1969, Tyree led a group of minority contractors and black workers to shut down publicly funded construction sites around Seattle. Hundreds of supporters marched onto the tarmac at SeaTac Airport in protest and to demand jobs and contracts. The late Congressman John Lewis would call this good trouble. In 1970, Tyree formed the United Construction Workers Association, UCWA, led by and run by black workers to lead protest and direct legal action to reverse the industry's discriminatory hiring and training practices. These black workers voted to provide funding to a group of Asian workers from the Alaska Canning Workers Association. And by 1973, the UCWA, ACWA, and the Northwest chapter of the United Farm Workers joined forces to found the Northwest Labor and Employment Law Office, LELO, a multiracial worker-directed law office to initiate legal solutions in their respective industries: construction, salmon canning, and agriculture. This model of worker organizing and legal action expanded to other cities, including Denver, Oakland, and cities throughout the South, across energy and manufacturing sectors. In the 1980s, Scott moved his family to Africa to explore other ways to improve the lives of Mozambican workers. Scott was interested in resisting the exploitation of third world workers and led a historic conference at Seebeck on Hood's Canal. 35 workers from a dozen countries discussed how to build their own international solidarity. By the time the World Trade Organization met in Seattle in 1999, Scott had raised the funds to bring these same ordinary workers to Seattle in protest of the WTO's impact. Tyree was a compassionate leader who listened to others and understood that ordinary workers were the ones who knew what was needed to resolve problems in their respective communities. It was through this lens that he worked tirelessly and taught other organizers like myself to ensure the voices and participation from Black and other workers of color into a collective fight for respect, equality, and justice. So when faced with a problem, Tyree would always say, well, what would the worker do? Or what would the worker say? So it's with this sentiment that I congratulate this year's recipient of the MLK Commemoration Committee's Tyree Scott Ordinary Worker Award. Black Lives Matter, Ordinary Workers Matter. Thank you.
And that's why that award was named after Tyree Scott for all the work that he's did. But everybody should know that gentleman who we just had on, Michael Wu, absolutely fantastic as it works, as it relates to labor relations and all his hard work. Eddie, you'd like to introduce the next person? Next award?
Yeah, the next award is the Aki Carosa Award. Aki Carosa was a teacher in the area. She has a middle school named after her. She was active in the civil rights movement, and I can recall one instance early in her career that she was going to go teach at Laurelhurst, and some of the white parents were saying, oh, our kid's going to have an accent, and Aki spoke better English than all of them put together. So I just want to let you know that the honoree, the winner for Public Agency Award is Leslie Jones, who is with Sound Transit. So we're very proud of our relationship with Leslie Jones. She's doing an outstanding job. And COVID-19 has changed a whole bunch of stuff. And Carlos said, hey, Leslie Jones, all right. Congratulations, Leslie. And congratulations to Reverend Willis as well. And
but let me throw out a little note about Leslie Jones. For y'all folks who don't know, Leslie Jones got long roots here in Seattle. Now, for those folks out there in the viewing audience, we're at a High Point. There's a lot of us at a High Point, and I remember when she was Leslie Graham.
All right.
Come on now, High Point. Larry Gossett, yeah, you lived in High Point for a while too. Here we go for High Point and Leslie Graham.
All right. Okay, then we have a couple more folks like John Yasutake from the Civil Rights Coalition, Rabbi Daniel Weiner from Temple de Hirsch, and I guess we'll start with John Yasutake. And then we also have Brother Dadabudu Dash, he will be on, and Luis Navarro from the Port of Seattle. So do we have John ready to roll? Roll on, John Yas.
John,
Hello, everyone. My name is John
John.
Yasutaki, longtime resident of Seattle, transplanted originally from Chicago, Illinois. I've been a member of the community and active in a number of groups. My background is in civil rights. And so I really feel honored to be able to talk about and share with you my thoughts on the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. The March on Washington in 1963 was an effort by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and many other civil rights activists to address the disparities in our society regarding discrimination in jobs and the aspect of freedom. It's the same issues that we're facing today. The lowest economic scale, the issue of the impact of the coronavirus on the African American community as well as other communities of color, police brutality, issues of African American men and women being shot and killed in our neighborhoods. We have an unresponsive administration, one that doesn't seem to care. And every day an event happens that just reinforces all the negative things that occur in our society. Yet and still, I believe there is some hope. Watching all that's been going on with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement and the hue and cry that's been created by that focus, the professional sports teams being involved. But still in all, it's a matter of searching for in the right, avenue to secure equity and equality for African Americans, and especially African Americans. People may argue with me on that, being a person of color myself, of Asian descent, but it was on, as they say, literally the coattails and on the heels of the movement by African Americans on civil rights to address the disparities in our country on the issue of institutionalized systemic racism and its impact and its effects on our society. And I feel very honored again to be part of that, to be a beneficiary of the movement initiated by African Americans. We are at a crossroads. There's no question about it. We have a number of issues coming at us on the forefront, and we need to respond in a way, in a manner that gets us to the point of equity and equality for all, but especially for individuals of African American descent, as they say, descendants of slaves from Africa in this country. And so, again, the thoughts in my sharing with you is that we need to get out the vote. We need to vote. We need to support programs that support our communities. We need to hold accountable our governments, our governmental agencies, our elected officials to do the things that need to be done, do the right thing, do the correct things, do the things that need to be done. We need to look at why there are so many disparities with respect to our health system, why the impact of the coronavirus is hitting hard, especially the African American community and other communities of color, but in particular the African American community. Poverty, joblessness, homelessness, poor health, all of these things and many others. A lack of educational opportunities, or in many cases, very substandard education. Again, here we go. We're talking about many of these things that have been talked about since 1963 and before. But let's move forward. Let's look at this as the 57th anniversary, and again, a restart and a startup of a whole new set of actions aimed at bringing about equity and equality. So I want to say to everyone who's listening, thank you very much. Again, I am honored to be asked to speak about this. And again, let's move forward in the struggle. And as they say, together, as the song says, we shall overcome. Thank you.
John Yasutaki has been involved in the community for quite a while. He and his twin brother, Mike, were the stalwarts in terms of coaching and mentoring young men through the 60s, 70s, well, the 70s and 80s and part of the 90s. for the Central Area Youth Association, CAYA. John also is one of the leaders in the Washington State Civil Rights Coalition, and we will also be hearing from Rabbi Daniel Weiner. In 1961, in Dr. King's only visit to Seattle, he did speak at Temple D. Hirsch. He was denied to speak at a church downtown, and the Brotherhood of Mount Zion had to rent the Eagles Auditorium for him to have a downtown presence. So we have Rabbi Daniel ready to go. Okay, Rabbi, next we'll hear from Rabbi Daniel Weiner from Temple D. Hirsch, Sinai. Thank you, Rabbi.
I am Rabbi Daniel Weiner, Senior Rabbi at Temple de Hirsch Sinai in Seattle and Bellevue, Washington. It is an honor to take part in this commemoration of Dr. King and the anniversary of the March on Washington. Beyond the obvious reason to celebrate this monumental moment in history, I am abundantly proud of the role my congregation played in the civil rights movement, and more specifically, Dr. King's visit to Seattle in the early 1960s. When Dr. King's message was considered too radical for many within even some progressive communities, and many turned him away from opportunities to speak when he came to our city, the lay and rabbinic leadership of Temple de Hirsch Sinai possessed the courage, determination, and vision to welcome Dr. King into our sanctuary and onto our pulpit. It was not a decision without its detractors in the broader community. But our leadership understood that if we were to keep faith with the principles of our tradition and the clarion call of the biblical prophets to let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, the prophetic voice within our midst must have a home and a platform. As we remember that fateful day almost 60 years ago on the National Mall, the will of our hearts and the works of our hands continue to strive and struggle to make real Dr. King's dream. It is the dream of the patriarch Jacob as he lay on the cold, hard ground, beholding a ladder rising to the heavens, realizing he was in God's presence and cherishing God's promise. It is the dream of Joseph, whose skill and vision saved his people from strife and starvation. And it is the dream of Moses, who, standing on the mountaintop, could see the goal of his people's journey to reach the promised land, though he would not be the one to take them there. Like Moses and Dr. King and all dreamers of soul and spirit, we know that the seeds we sow today will be reaped in the freedom, peace, and blessing of tomorrow, and that our sacred work will forge the foundation for a better world for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you, and God bless you.
I want to thank Rabbi Daniel Weiner from Temple de Hirsch Sinai in Seattle for his comments. We also have comments from people in our Indian American community, the Southeast Asian community, who have been involved with the struggle as well. As a matter of fact, a group of them are assisting Pastor Ricky Willis in preparing meals for the individuals who are occupying the tiny house villages. There was a trial run made a couple of weeks ago, and hopefully these folks will be getting fed every day. We're talking about 300 people who are in need. They're also talking about doing tutorial programs for the kids who are there, computer literacy, and they'll also have a technology program with instructors at the Seattle, the Central District Community Preservation Development Authority, the McKinney Center. And our next person to speak will be Dadabudu Dash, who's also a member of the Seattle King County Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee. Brother Dash.
Hi, this is Debaduta Dash from the Washington State and India Trade Relation Action Committee. The purpose of the March on Washington was to advocate for the civil and economic rights of African Americans. At the march, Martin Luther King Jr., standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, delivered his historic I Have a Dream speech, in which he called for an end to racism. That was 1963. The march is credited with helping to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and preceded the Selma voting rights movement, which led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This march still inspires us because even after 57 years after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., America is still far from his dream. Across measures ranging from criminal justice issues to economic well-being, Black Americans still lag far behind white Americans. Black Americans make much less money than their white peers. Black people are still unemployed at nearly twice the rates as white people. White family wealth is nearly 7 times greater than black family wealth. Black people are more than twice as likely to live in poverty. Black kids are more likely to grow up in poor neighborhoods than they were decades ago. School segregation remains fairly common, and the college education gap, however, remains huge. Black voter turnout has generally trended up in the past couple of decades, but the instances of suppression of black voters have become more frequent. Incarceration rates have grown a lot, and black people have suffered the most as a result. Black people are more likely to be shot and killed by police than their white counterparts. We got to put our acts together, ending the systemic racism in our nation. This will only be possible if all communities can come together and bring their affluence, influence, and resources to the forefront to address this issue. I strongly believe that if we don't get it resolved, nothing else could be resolved to let us move forward. So let's work together and end the systemic racism, living the legacy of the march led by Martin Luther King Jr. That's the best we can do for the humanity, for the United States of America. Thank you.
All right, Brother Dash, I want to thank you for your service to the community, and we look forward to you and your group continuing to feed the needy and train the people who need the training and uplifting. And we also have one other person, Luis Navarro, who was an awardee from the Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee last year. He's at the Port of Seattle. He was a former director of the Office of Social Responsibility. He got a new title, but he's still doing good things. And we appreciate Luis Navarro and the support of the Port of Seattle.
Luis has done a lot for our community. This is a person that everybody should try to get to know Luis and see the work that he's done in order to improve contracting relationships. Wasn't for Luis, in light of I-200, it'd be a heck of a lot worse for our communities right now.
Hello everyone, I'm Luis Navarro, Director of Workforce Development for the Port of Seattle. On behalf of our Port of Seattle Commissioners, the Executive Director of the Port of Seattle, and the Senior Director of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, it is truly an honor to join this commemoration of the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. At the Port of Seattle, we're beginning the journey of acknowledging institutional racism, systematic racism, and we are working towards changing the system to ensure that all members of our communities, in particular people of color, have the same opportunities of access to economic opportunity as everyone else. The work of the Office of Workforce Development includes collaborating with organizations in our communities to provide training and access to learning to young men and women and adults of color so they can learn a skill and develop a career in important economic sectors like the Port of Seattle. It is truly an honor for me as well as the 2019 recipient of the Public Agency Collaboration Award, and it is therefore a responsibility that I carry forward every day to ensure that I work with communities of color, with the Black community in particular, in ensuring that opportunities are created and are meaningful for our young men and women of color and adults. On behalf of all of us, this is a really important celebration, and we honor the work of Martin Luther King and continue to work with you as we move forward in making the port a more inclusive organization. Thank you.
Okay, Haywood, so we got a couple of more people and in the award category. Go ahead.
But we have Chardonnay Beaver coming up.
That's right, spoken word.
Whoa.
Moet.
And she will speak.
No, Moet Beaver.
It's her sister,
Yeah, Moet, our older sister, yes.
But
Moet.
she's absolutely fantastic. If you'd have seen her at some of the Martin Luther King marches in the past, this lady is great. I think she needs to make an album. I don't know if y'all remember the old drums and stuff in the past, but I think the spoken word album probably could sell fairly well. Chardonnay.
Okay, I'm Moet. It's nice to meet you all. My poem doesn't have a title, so I'm just gonna start. They keep telling us to swim, but we can't swim. I'm just trying to win. I'm just trying to live. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm just trying not to fall from the wind. Pressure consumes my mind so much at times, I fear I will have a mental breakdown and never be able to function correctly the same again. I must excel in all these areas where I need to be seen and accepted because I guess it matters to people I've never met and to those that I have can never say my name right. I believe all things happen for a reason, but some don't make it to see what all the hell is worth living for. I fear at times the devil stands closely behind me, awaiting my slip up as an opportunity to drown me. God, I scream for a tightrope. Please throw me the tightrope before he takes me down. There's drugs and escapes I've tried to take, yet still he pulls me to the ground. I know you judge, but listen, please. I've even tried church too, but they judge like you. So what else am I to do? Sex I've tried, I'm not gonna lie. At times it came through, but it never seemed to fulfill the things that I needed it to do. Money I need, I'm in deep need. I need the pressure to relieve. I can get proper time to grieve. People like me don't get out. We work and work until our heart bursts out, and work until we can't no more. No time to sit down while we're supposed to be cleaning floors. While we having babies and going to school and falling in love and hating ourselves for all the things that we never got to do, and having bills and paying bills and kissing ass and being alone and screaming to the top of your fucking lungs for just a second to breathe, from all the treading in the cold ass water in your closet because you know even standing in their face that nobody hears you because nobody cares. Soon you start to think maybe it feels good to just let it go, to sink down low, to allow the water to rise high above your head. For just that moment, you get that beautiful second to just exhale.
Okay, Haywood, now we have another set of awards to present. And before we really get into that, we want to hear from Estela Ortega, the dynamic executive director of El Centro de la Raza. I was one of the occupants of Beacon Hill School on October 11th. Roberto wanted us to be there on October 12th so that we can tell the police we discovered that building like Columbus discovered America. So anyway, we want to hear from Estela Ortega.
Good evening. My name is Estela Ortega. I'm the Executive Director of El Centro de la Raza, and it is an honor and a privilege to be with you all this evening. Mil gracias to Eddie and Hayward for honoring Roberto by naming a youth award in his name, keeping alive his legacy, his fighting spirit for justice and equality, love for the poor, love for the homeless, and a special love for children and youth of all races, Black, brown, red, yellow, and white. Roberto Maestas dedicated his life to fighting for the poor and raised their consciousness about their unused power. He took part in or helped lead every major social justice movement, fighting racism, hate, and the injustices that took place in the Pacific Northwest for over 40 years. During the 70s and the 80s, he supported the Black community's takeover of construction sites that excluded Black workers from high-paying jobs, joined with the Nisqually tribe in demanding their right to fish as long as the rivers run. He supported strikes for both Boeing employees and garbage workers who demanded safe working conditions, fair wages, and benefits. And he joined with the Asian community in protesting against the gentrification of the International District and so much more. Roberto was a teacher. He taught at Franklin High School, Upward Bound, and the University of Washington. His students loved him, and even today I still hear from some of them. Roberto saw children and youth as the hope of the world. He always began his speeches with a quote from Jose Marti, a Cuban revolutionary in the early 20th century. It is for the children that we work, for they are the ones who know how to love, for they are the hope of the world. In October of 1972, Roberto was the lead organizer of the Old Beacon Hill School, which led to the founding of El Centro de la Raza, the Center for People of All Races. The occupation was led by Latinos and had unwavering support and solidarity from communities of color, the faith, and the anti-war movement. And for this solidarity, we are forever grateful. As his wife, I will let you know that he was not a perfect man, yet he worked hard to rid himself of sexism. He was devoted to his children, loved his culture. He always raised the importance of having all voices at the table and uplifted others to develop their courage. Roberto would tell you all the recognition that he received in El Centro's name, the gains we made in the struggle for justice, is not the work of one person, not the work of Roberto Maestas, but the collective efforts of an organized community demanding justice, as we see in the Black Lives Matter movement today. I send congratulations to the winner of the Roberto Maestas Youth Award. Mil gracias, and have a good evening. Thank you.
And the winner of the Roberto Maestas Award is Bobby Alexander.
Yo, Bobby! Young Leader! Young Leadership Award.
Actually,
well deserved.
Bobby has been leading for quite a while. As a matter of fact, 4 years ago, he was co-chair of the Seattle King County Martin Luther King Celebration Committee, and now he is vice chair of the Seattle King County Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition. So we have some words from Bobby Alexander coming up.
And now he just got his law degree too and passed the bar. Please, Bobby.
My name is Bobby Alexander. I am the 2021 Vice Chair of the Martin Luther King Jr. March and Rally Committee or Coalition. I don't know, the name has changed a couple times. Anyways, in the past I've been a chair, it's 2016, and in 2020 I was the program chair. So I have quite a bit of experience with the committee. And recently, one of the founders, Eddie Rye Jr., asked me to provide a reflection on the fact that we are now 57 years removed from the March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech. My initial reaction is to be amazed that the March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech is probably still the most quoted or the most relevant African American speech and march that's ever occurred in the United States, that we've gone 57 years without there being anything that's matched it. You're talking about 250,000 people in this nation's capital. And I guess there could be some arguments about that, but the fact is that the I Have a Dream speech is burned into the imagination of every single Black American especially, but maybe so even American. And yet, a lot of the core messaging there, just the being judged on the content of your character and not the color of your skin, as Americans, we're still falling short of that. We still know that in King County, if you're African American, your income, your household income is probably under $40,000. But if you're white, it's probably well over $70,000. We know that if you're a white male with a criminal record, at least it was this way in 2015, you had a better chance of getting a job than a black male with no criminal record. We know that the schools in Bellevue are still funded better than Seattle public schools. We know that there's an achievement gap between black and white students in Seattle public schools that they don't seem to be overly interested in fixing. We know that we can watch videos every day of white people resisting arrest in ways that black people would never even imagine that they could do. And those white people seem to walk away from the incident, but black people cannot walk away from anything. We know that black people are still going to do more time for the same crime. We know that when it comes to voting, felony voter restrictions are still in place in order in many states, especially in the South, to disenfranchise black voters. We know that until 2020, and it's still this way in some places, you couldn't go to work with hair like this. We're still having to fight to have black natural hair in the workplace. 57 years after Dr. King asked to be judged by the content of his character. And although there are a lot of little black boys and little black girls playing with little white boys and little white girls, something happens when those children grow, where black girls suddenly become viewed as overaggressive, and they're unable to express their emotions in school. They'll be disciplined. When white children scream out, we ask what's wrong. When black girls do, they get sent to the principal's office. When black boys get in fights, they get expelled. When white kids get in fights, there's an interest in what's happening at home. All of this is still happening. It's not going anywhere. 57 years later, the fight is not over. And I think really that's what my message is. I think that's what I'm stuck with when I think about the March on Washington, that it was a great moment in time, and it did lead to legislation and led to the Civil Rights Bill, led to to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But that stuff didn't finish the job. That stuff didn't bring us equity. That stuff didn't make up for the Homestead Act, where white Americans were given land and black Americans were excluded, or the GI Bill that largely black Americans were excluded from, and the consequences and the generational wealth gap. The March on Washington didn't fix that, so the impetus is still on us to take the next step. And we have to take the next step in an environment that is probably just as racially polarizing as that time period. Right now, there are lawsuits from students and universities claiming that blacks are getting special treatment. Essentially claiming that black students and brown students, they don't deserve to be at the university because they're not scoring as well on the objective metrics. They're calling that preferential treatment. They're calling it reverse discrimination. That's the environment we're in. So the little gains that we've made in education, the ultimate weapon for social mobility, some people want to take that away. The fight is not over. So although at times we may get uncomfortable with what's happening right now out in the streets, at times we may not have the stomach for it, it's important to remember that We need to respect our brothers and sisters in their fight for justice. We need to respect our brothers and sisters in whatever tactics that they are comfortable with to get the justice that they need. Because when we look at Dr. King's legacy, we characterize it as peaceful, we characterize it as palatable, but at the time it wasn't. At the time, he was viewed as an agitator. He was viewed as somebody that was a menace. And now that same sort of rhetoric is being thrown out at people in the streets fighting for our rights. And I say we would be well served to remember that that's how Dr. King was viewed as well. The fight's not over.
Bobby Alexander is very worthy of receiving the Roberto Maestas Award. A young man that has a good vision and is vice chair of the Seattle-King County Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition. And we also have another award that is the Jerry Ware Award. Jerry Ware, Geraldine is her name. She was very active in the city of Seattle. She passed away, I think, in 1997. But she's a former chair of the Seattle Human Rights Commission. She was a member of the Central Area School Council when black folks lived in the Central area. They had an associate superintendent, the late Reverend Dr. Roland Patterson. And so we have Sarah Sensei Wilson is the winner of the Jerry Ware Award. All right. Now, Sarah Sensei Wilson is the co-founder and elected leader of the Urban Native Education Alliance with the Seattle School District. And she's been fighting a fight. As a matter of fact, the superintendent displaced that program and they were virtually homeless for a while. But through the dedication and devotion of Sarah Sensei Wilson and others in the Urban Native Education Alliance, they're rebounding. But we still need accountability from the Seattle School Board, and we definitely need some accountability from Denise Juneau, who has displaced about every African-American male that had any kind of position with the school district. And then to fire the black female principal of Leschi while schools were closed in the latter part of April is unacceptable. So let's hear from Sarah.
Let's also say this. You know, when we look at the educational gap, the achievement gap, Sarah, 100% of her young people graduated, and if you look at their grades and what they've accomplished, how do you defund a program that has total success? That's unacceptable. That's what she needs to get credit for, the academic achievements of her students. Please.
Hello, my name is Sarah Sensei Wilson. I'm Ogallala Lakota, and I'm the chair of the Urban Native Education Alliance. UNEA is a 501c3 Native-led, volunteer-based, youth-centered organization grounded in cultural values and principles of integrity, interconnectedness, service, and inclusion. We want to thank Eddie Rye and the Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee for this opportunity to share in celebrating the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, D.C. for Jobs and Justice. UNEA is the largest and the longest running community-based organization supporting Indian education in Seattle. Our successful programs provide Native students with holistic and multifaceted network of culture-based resources, mentoring, tutoring, and culturally relevant learning. Our vast contributions towards improving Native student success and Indian education in the Seattle Public Schools spans over 12 years. UNEA to date has a 100% graduation rate for Native students engaged in regular Clear Sky programming. On June 4th, 2019, UNEA received a letter from the Seattle Public Schools leadership terminating our contract community partnership agreement. The termination of our partnership was an eviction of our Native community from the Robert Eagle Staff building. Despite our written appeal and student, community, elder, parent testimonies, and a flood of support letters from non-Native and Native-led nonprofits and organizations in Seattle, a wide range of political allies, including Washington State House of Representative Chair of Education, Miss Sharon Tomiko Santos. The termination decision was upheld by the Seattle superintendent and the school board members. The district has maintained silence and refuses to respond to the concerns and issues raised by our families, students, and community. Seattle Public Schools continues to fail Native students and families and functions as a mechanism for inflicting continuous and lasting consequences on our community and society at large. Native students have the highest dropout rates, the lowest graduation rates, and are disproportionately represented in special education, and experience the highest discipline action according to the 2018 OSPI and Seattle Public School data. Seattle Public Schools colludes and conspires with big funders such as the Alliance for Education and the City of Seattle, with lack of community oversight, no accountability to our communities of color, and with no input on shared decision making with our communities. And all the while, Seattle Public Schools continues to practice policies and procedures resulting in systematically and unapologetically alienating, disenfranchising Native students and families. We consider this an action of attrition warfare, and it is absolutely unconscionable. In closing, I want to express our solidarity with the Black Lives Matters movement. Our shared struggle as Indigenous, Black, and Brown people strengthens our collective wisdom to coalesce in solidarity and to unlock and liberate us all from the chains of colonialism. One of my favorite quotes is from Chief Sitting Bull Lakota. Let us put our minds together and see what life we can create for our children. If you're interested in donating or supporting Urban Native Education Alliance, please contact us at our website at www.urbannativeeducation.org or contact us at 206-941-0338. Thank you.
Sarah Sens Wilson and the United Urban Native Education Alliance are providing sensational leadership for the students. As you heard her give testimony that they have a 100% graduation rate. Hayward, how can they kick a program like that out and defund them with the Seattle School District? And the Seattle School Board members need to say something. Come on, you were elected to be advocates for the students and the parents, and you're not saying anything. So Hayward, now we have the Day Charlene Distinguished Award.
Oh, everybody knows. Look at D. Charlene, 23rd Madison's been there forever. This lady, when everybody, all the developers up there were trying to push her out and say, no, you need to sell, no, you need to sell. Even though, God rest her soul, she passed away a couple of years ago, I guess now. Her daughter, Rita Green, is still maintaining that property in her family's name. And on that note, D. Charlene has been determined as a business person. The D. Charlene Distinguished Business Award. Because D. Charlene, wait till you hear from her daughter, please. Rita Green. Can we show Rita Green?
We don't have that clip, we have a slide.
We don't have that clip, but we have a slide. But let me just share with you a little bit about D. Charlene. When she first went to the bank, and we're talking about like in 1950, I was born in 52, so it was 53. God is good, right after I was born. She went to the bank to try to get a loan, right? She's trying to get a loan. She went to over 30 banks. They all turned her down with the same information. When she went to a bank, had her little white friend come with her, put down C. Williams. Then she got the loan. She was able to buy the property. She's held that property, but she's always been committed to the community. Additionally, she was on the Seattle Advisory Board under Wes Holman, where they did the urban planning here in the city of Seattle. And she told us 20 plus years ago, look, the developers are coming. The downtown Seattle can't go any further south, can't go further north. They're coming for the CD. And that's the whole idea behind gentrification. It's like you got all these little wild animals, they look for the weakest little animal or the oldest, and that's when they start snatching up houses. But on that note, we're very proud to have D. Charlene, the award named after D. Charlene, but our winner, Eddie, Ezel's Chicken.
Louis Rudd, co-founder and president of Ezel's Famous Chicken. And Louis does a lot of things in the community. All right, Louis.
Go, Louis!
And in addition to that, Louis is a new board member for the Central District Community Preservation Development Authority.
But you know, on every event that we do, what do we have?
Ezel's Chicken.
Ezel's Chicken. We're going back
from the first Martin Luther King March in 1983 up until the last one we had.
I think it's almost once a week. My wife makes me go pick up the extra spicy tender strips. Love them.
Okay. So, do we have the voting? We have some voters.
But we have a picture of Louis.
Oh, Josephine. We're gonna do Josephine. Josephine is doing a medley of civil rights songs. Josephine is bad. She can go. Josephine, are you getting down?
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home to be with my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home to be with my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave, going home to be with my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. And I'll fight for my right to be free. And I'll fight for my right to be free. we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we are not afraid today. We are not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we are not alone today. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome, that we are not afraid, that we are not alone, that we'll walk hand in hand, and we shall overcome someday.
Okay, Hayward, you know, we got a big election coming up. It's been 4 years almost of 45. We also have a lot of local elections and a lot of policies are made at the local level.
Just so you people know, we say 45. Remember, number 44 was Barack Obama. It's hard to say that other guy's name, so we just say 44. Please go ahead, Ed.
But anyway, so we have a clip of John Lewis. His last few breaths was talking about voting to make sure something happens in November. So if we could have the John Lewis clip.
And when we look at John Lewis and everything that's going on, it's absolutely fantastic. But also even Josephine, when she's saying, she makes me want to go vote. Can I go vote today, Eddie? We got to wait for our ballots.
You have to at least wait for your ballot, brother.
When do the ballots come out again?
They come out in the second week in October.
Oh, man. Okay, everybody hears that.
That's right. Don't let it sit on your table. As soon as you get your vote, mail it or drop it off. It's just as soon as you get it. Make sure there's no problems. Do we have John Lewis up? Okay, John Lewis. The next Voting Rights Act might be the John Lewis. It should be.
On Sunday, March 7, 1965, about 600 of us attempted to walk a march from Selma to Montgomery to dramatize to the nation and to the world that people wanted to register to vote, to become participants in the democratic process. I happen to believe that the right to vote is precious. It's almost sacred in a democratic society such as ours. It is the most powerful, nonviolent instrument or tool that we have. And everybody, every single person who's a citizen, who's of age, should be able to cast that vote. It should be as simple, as easy as getting a glass of water.
You know, Eddie, and I love what John Lewis said. Look, voting should be easy. To me, it should be a holiday, or at least on Saturday, although we do now do the mailing of the ballot, so that's absolutely fantastic. But if they're going to make you stand in line, clearly at least should be on your day off.
It should be voting for president and federal elections should be a national holiday. That's what it should be. And due to this pandemic, they need to have mailed-in voting. The states that have it haven't had any problems. Everything has been contrived by the people on the Republican side.
And the sad part, number 45 says what? That you can't mail in your ballots, it's all going to be fraudulent, but he mails his in and his whole family? What's that about?
Well, I can't even discuss because his rationale makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. He's trying to satisfy his own ego and his own self. So we know locally we have the NAACP leading voter registration and voter education. And I think we have something from Claude Burfict, first vice president of the Seattle King County branch of the NAACP, is going to have some comments about voting.
And he's also on the Martin Luther King County Labor Council Executive Committee. So every time you turn around, Claude's out there. And look at our best wishes to you, Claude, from the Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee, which you know you're a member. Best wishes to us. Claude just recently had a mild stroke, Eddie. And I don't know if people know about that. I'm not trying to put that out there, your personal business, Claude, but look at, we're all behind you, brother, and you've always been there for us in the community.
Good morning. My name is Claude Burfict, First Vice President of Seattle King County NAACP. The message I'm sending you today is the importance of your franchise rights, the right to vote. Do you know what black people had to go through to get that right? If we want to see and make change in our city, county, state, and national government, we need to exercise that right that we fought so hard to get. That right is to vote. As you have seen, 2020 has been a year to remember our black men and women mercilessly have been killed by police officers, and our president has been advocating law and order, which means open season on blacks in America. As black, brown, and white Americans, we can no longer sit back and watch what is happening to our country. The division that this current administration has created. Today in America, we have a broken system. And in order to fix that system, we need to, again, exercise our franchise and constitutional rights. Please vote. And if you are not registered, please register so that you have the opportunity to exercise that right. Vote. It's one of the things, the main thing I can say is to exercise that franchise right. If you want to make change, vote. My shirt says, reclaiming our country. And in order to reclaim our country, we have to be able to exercise that right in order to get this administration out of office, and then we can fix this government. And we can fix this country. So please exercise that right to vote. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yeah, it's very important that everybody cast their ballot.
But we're not endorsing any candidate. Y'all know how, but we're not endorsing any candidate. Huh?
No, people have to use their own judgment.
There
So
you go.
if you like the way things are, then you know what you have to do. You want change, you know what you have to do. So now we also have well, Moet Beaver has been already, but this is her sister Chardonnay. Chardonnay and Moet are the granddaughters of Liz Beaver, the daughter of Dennis Beaver, the daughters of Dennis Beaver.
Now, you know, I got them backwards, but hey, it's all in the family. Fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. Multi-talented family.
Okay, do we have Chardonnay up? There she is.
Hi, my name is Chardonnay Beaver, and I'm here to tell you why it's so important to vote. For over the last 70 plus years, voter suppression has been so real in the U.S., and folks like John Lewis, Martin Luther King Jr., and today Stacey Abrams has been fighting against voter suppression. We need to make sure that our votes are uplifted, valued, and heard. To that point, make sure to get your auntie, your nieces, your cousins, your brother, your sister, your grandma, or your grandpa off the couch, signing their ballot and mailing it in by November 3rd, 2020. Get out there, be empowered, and vote because we really are determining our future as a country. Thank you and take care.
All right, we want to thank both of those Beaver ladies, Chardonnay and Moet, her sister. They do own the Seattle Facts newspaper, and their dad, Dennis, owns the Tacoma Facts newspaper, so that commercial is right there. So now, Hayward, we're down to the Bernie White Bear Legacy Award, and I think we have a clip from Claudia Kaufman before we get there. So do we have Claudia Kaufman pulled up? Okay, we'll hear from Claudia Kaufman from the Muckleshoot tribe, although she's a Nez Perce.
Past senator. She was a state senator, too,
Yes.
out of Auburn.
Hello, I'm Claudia Kaufman, member of the Nez Perce tribe and former state senator. It's an honor and a privilege to be here to say a few words about Bernie White Bear. Bernie was from the Colville Reservation, and he embodied the true spirit as being a servant to his community. He embraced community organizing, community development, ensuring education for the youth, and always sharing his culture. Now, Bernie was not a tall man, but he could cast a large shadow. The Bernie White Bear Legacy Award is exemplifying the difference one individual can make and the magnitude of their reach on others. Bernie was a dedicated community volunteer focused on changing inequities. He brought humor to serious negotiations, and his imprint is indelible, and it leaves a lasting impact for generations to come. His resiliency is our resiliency. I'm proud to have known him. I'm proud to have worked with him, and it's an honor to speak of him. Thank you.
We are so proud of our recipient for 2020, our highest award, the Legacy Award, to Diane Narasaki, ACRS, Asian Counseling Referral Services. Whoa, Diane.
She has retired, though. If you go there now, you will not find her unless she's volunteering today.
Now, for over 20 years, if you go down into the International District, you'll see the buildings that she's constructed when you look at the healthcare facilities, mental health, food bank, you name the resources.
And their big offices on
employment.
Martin Luther King Jr. Way. So.
And this was all done under her leadership. But what we're really proud about Diane is that she was one of the people that helped make the King County, Martin Luther King County Minority Executive Directors Coalition alive and flourish of the past few years ago. We are extremely proud of all her accomplishments, and achievements and what she's done for us.
And we got it up on the screen. So Diane, thank you very much. So now we have a closing statement, but that's going to come from our president, our chair of the Seattle King County Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition, Ms. Sade Moore.
But before we put on Sade, just understand when people are the recipients of these awards, they must embody the principles of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in their life. They have to live out those principles and reflect them in their lifestyle, both in their personal lifestyle and in their business and their relationship with the community. Diane Narasaki, over her entire lifetime, has always exemplified those values.
Okay, so Sade Moore, do we have Sade up? Our chair of the Seattle King County Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition that sponsors the march. Go ahead, Sade.
Good day and good morning. My name is Sade Moore, and I am the chair of the Seattle Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition. On this 57th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington, in honor of this glorious day, and this day committed to service for all Black Americans, I'd like to say that the Seattle Martin Luther King Jr. Organizing Coalition is committed to empowering, uplifting, and pursuing Dr. King's everlasting dream. In these unprecedented times, more than ever, we wanted to say to all of our brothers and sisters nationwide that we are with you. And we are marching virtually and in person in solidarity. For more information about what we're doing in the community and how we are serving, you can visit our website at www.seattlemlkcoalition.org, where you find our calendar, many photos, our services, our committees, and our contact information. Peace be with you all. Much love. And fight on.
Yeah, this has been Eddie Rye, co-convener of the Seattle King County Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee. We want to thank all the people that participated in this endeavor to have a virtual remembrance of the 57th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington, D.C. for Jobs and Freedom. And I'm so happy today, Reverend Al Sharpton and Martin Luther King Jr. III and his daughter were back in Washington, D.C. today, doing it all over again. I couldn't make it because being an older G, or OG, coronavirus, I am a suspect and I don't want to catch up with it. So I really do thank the crew here. Want to thank Omari Salisbury, the crew that's here taking care of business. We really appreciate what you guys were able to do. And hopefully we have spread the spirit around. And this, Carlos says that this will be posted a little later. We have had a few additions to make. So, Hayward?
And I want to thank those people. I know a lot of you tried to contribute your words and thoughts and share with the greater community, and I know you couldn't, but look, we're still looking forward to receiving that information. Hopefully we're going to be able to expand on this according to the staff here who have been absolutely fantastic. But in that same vein, the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods, a sincere thank you. And to the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, a sincere thank you. Without your assistance, we wouldn't have made this program possible. Every year, look for us next year. And some of you young people, we need more of you out. And you saw Sade Moore. She gave you the website. Please, let's see you at this march and rally this year, come January.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.